Today I want to talk about how to write an essay for the Advanced Placement History Test. It is important to say from the start that writing an essay is not a formula. It is an art. So we have to keep in mind the criteria for writing a good essay, the audience we are writing for, and the skills that you are developing. So let's start with how you will be graded. What? That does sound kind of strange. We seem to be starting backwards with the end goal, good grade. Why? Because there are different styles of grading for different audiences. You are probably more used to what is called holistic grading. Holistic grading refers to how a teacher looks at your overall essay and makes a general judgment on how the essay looks as a whole. This type of grading does have its advantages. It allows teachers the freedom to give a general idea of what you need to achieve, and the teachers can judge how well you connect and organize your overall argument. However, the type of grading used in AP history classes is called dimensional scoring. Whoa, those are big words. What does that mean? Well, you're going to be graded on separate skills, including thesis construction, contextualization, historical thinking skills, and evidence. Each of these skills is given a weight and then measured on how well you completed the skill for that essay. The score for the essay is then a combination of the evaluations of each of these individual skills. The downside to this grading is that you can lose points quickly if you don't hit the skills. The upside is that you just need to hit these individual skills to rack up points. So we should walk through each of these skills and see some examples for how you can complete them. The first major skill is contextualization. Contextualization occurs at the beginning of an essay in the first 3 sentences of the introduction. It sets the context or the overarching events that lead up to the essay argument. The metaphor I like to use for contextualization is the way that Star Wars movies started. Note how most of the movies started with a roll of what happened just before the movie got started. This helps to give you a frame for what is about to come. Think of the very first movie that was created back in the 1970s before anyone even knew what the Star Wars story was all about. The movie begins with a roll about the expansion of this empire, the creation of a Death Star, and the continuous fight between the rebellion and the empire. Now we get into the movie. I want you to do the same idea for your essays. Right after the contextualization, and in the same introductory paragraph, is the thesis. We all know that the thesis is the main argument of the essay. However, it needs to do several things. It needs to provide an answer to all parts of the prompt. It needs to provide a reason for the argument, and it needs to address the sprite impact in the prompt. Let's take a look at a really good thesis versus a poor thesis. So this would be a typical essay prompt you would get for a cause and effect essay. Describe and explain how changes in political power after World War II impacted the global economy. Notice you're asked to do analysis, explain. You're also asked cause and effect. Changes in political power after World War II, the effect global economy. So let's take a look at a poor thesis. After World War II, the leaders of the world made many decisions to create complex solutions to many problems. You notice that this is just a really vague argument. Yes, the argument is at least addressing the right time period, and it's addressing both cause and effect, but it's vague in what it's saying. Here's an excellent thesis. Following World War II, correct time period, the leaders of the world created more international trade. There we go, a specific cause and effect relationship. To tie countries into peaceful relationships instead of competitive military ones. There we have a really specific effect. So we have a cause, the cause international trade, the effect, peaceful relationships instead of the competitive military ones. Notice it's specific, not factual, but specific in its argumentation. Your essay will also need to demonstrate the use of support or evidence. This means that you need to provide a sufficient amount of evidence. The evidence needs to be significant. The evidence needs to be described. The evidence needs to be concise. How do you do all this? First, a good rule is to have about 5 pieces of evidence throughout the whole essay. Second, make sure that the evidence provides the main details. And third, make sure that the analysis of the evidence ties back to the main argument. Here's an example of a strong piece supporting evidence to the argument. So we have 2 possible pieces of evidence here. We're going to take a look at a poor piece of evidence and an excellent piece of evidence. And remember, this is still going off of that same prompt that we looked at. After World War II, what were the changes that took place from political leaders? The world leaders in Europe and the United States established institutions to create more trade between countries. Okay, the reason why this is a poor piece of evidence is that we really aren't given any specifics here. At least we do have some kind of attachment to the original question, but we really need something that's going to give us more specific details. Here's an excellent piece of evidence. The world leaders in Europe and the United States lowered tariffs and created international institutions like the World Bank to provide loans to developing countries to increase their industrialization for trade. Notice here I have very specific details. I have everything from lowered tariffs, international institutions, the World Bank, developing countries, and creating more industrialization. Notice there's a connection back to the prompt, and on top of that, I provided specific details. But also notice I can do this in one sentence. I'm not looking for an unending amount of details and description. I'm just looking here for the basic and most important details for this example. The last major skill that you will be evaluated is the historical analysis and reasoning skill. This looks to see if you can use this skill in the essay prompt. There are three possibilities on these skills. You can be asked a prompt that is going to be cause and effect, change in continuity, or comparison and contrast. Here are three possible questions covering these historical skills. So how do you show that you've done all these skills? Use your topic sentences to complete these skills. A topic sentence should use the skill that is being asked in the prompt. And you want to do this for each topic sentence to make sure that you demonstrate the use of complex skills. Here's an example of doing this.
So this particular example for a topic sentence says that global leaders used international relationships in order to make changes in the global system. Notice that it's specific, it gives us a cause and effect relationship, and it supports the overall thesis that we've been arguing that since World War II, global leaders met together and used organizations like the World Bank, the United Nations, and other international organizations to create more trade.
There is another way that you are going to show your ability to hit these skills. You're actually going to be writing two introductory paragraphs. The first will be a paragraph that has contextualization and then a thesis. Right after that is going to be a second and shorter introductory paragraph. The second paragraph will be a paragraph that provides a potential contrary opinion to your thesis, and then a restatement of why your thesis is overall better. This means you will be providing what's called a weighing statement against the alternative opinion. So let's take a look at two examples of what this possible second paragraph would look like. Here's a poor example. Some historians would argue that global leaders did many things with their militaries, economies, and political institutions following World War II in order to create stability. But this is not really correct. First off, the statement of the thesis in the first sentence is not really well done. It's very vague. Some things were done. But the real problem is in the second sentence. But this is not really correct. Well, why not? And there's no weighing statement. Here's an excellent example. Some historians would argue that global leaders focused more on expanding their militaries to protect their nations against future international threats. Here we're told that some historians believe military is what was really important following World War II. But this is where we're going to get a really good example of weighing. However, while it is true that some countries continued with spending on strong militaries, the overall momentum was to create industrial and service markets that could compete in international trade. Notice there is a credibility given to the opposing viewpoint about militaries, but the statement of overall says that there is a weighing in which industrial and service markets are still far more important. This is what I want you to do for your second introductory paragraph. Notice it's short, 2 to 3 sentences at the most. There is a credibility given to an opposing argument. You have an overall statement, and you give a reason why your thesis is still more correct. So what should your essay look like by the end of all this? You will need the following. First, an introductory paragraph with 3 sentences for contextualization and about 2 to 3 sentences for a thesis. A second, shorter introductory paragraph with an alternative thesis, an overall statement, and then a weighing statement on why your thesis is still more correct. Then you will have multiple body paragraphs. And these body paragraphs, about 2 to 3, should start with a topic sentence using the historical thinking skill, rule of 3 for support, and then analysis using the historical thinking skill. So last up, what we want to do is, in our concluding paragraph, make a synthesis. Now, synthesis used to be required in the rubric. It no longer is. However, it is one of the paths that we can use to get the complexity point. The way we do this is to make a comparison between different time periods. Now, in order to make that comparison make sense, we have to have a good reason behind why we're making that comparison. Then we have to make sure it's significant. How do we know it's significant? Because it can be connected back to and support the thesis, just like we would do in any other argument in our essay. Okay, so let's take a look at an example of what a good synthesis argument would look like. For example, in this particular one that I'm going to use, the question was talking about the system of goods and services being traded over the Indian Ocean during the post-classical age. So we make a synthesis between trade of goods and services over the Indian Ocean to the modern process of globalization. The diffusion of goods and services over the Indian Ocean, the post-classical age, was similar to the modern process of globalization. Okay, here we go. There's two different time periods. During the post-classical age, ideas from Islam, Christianity, and Judaism were spread from Africa, Middle East, and India over the Indian Ocean trade routes. Also, merchants were able to sell their goods and services over the three regions due to the quicker connection between civilizations. So notice what we've done there. We set up what the Indian Ocean trade route was about, and we connected it back to our major argument. Similarly, the internet in the same time period of globalization has allowed for culture, ideas, and communication to spread rapidly across the globe. Anyone with an internet connection can sell their products to people around the world. Notice how we've made a commonality over time periods between trade routes and the idea of diffusion of goods and services and ideas. This is significant because it shows how trade routes have commonly affected civilizations through syncretizing both culture and economic trade relationships. So there we connected back to our thesis and make sure it's supported. So one of the things I emphasize, you want to have about 3 to 4 sentences. Make sure you make that argument, make the comparison, state why it is significant, connecting back to the thesis. Okay, here are the big takeaways. First, remember that the grading for AP essays is about how well you hit the skills that are being evaluated. Second, remember that you need to provide the big skills: contextualization, thesis, evidence, historical thinking skills. And show you can make a complex argument by acknowledging another point of view and why your argument is still overall more correct.